Hi, this is Jason from the Nerds RPG Variety Cast, and you are listening to Tale of the Manticore.
The following podcast is intended for a mature audience. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome back to Tale of the Manticore, Season 3. Like the creature from which it takes its name, Tale of the Manticore is a mashup, a crossbreeding between two different species of storytelling. Here you will find the unpredictability of old-school paper and dice games with the storycraft of a dark fantasy novel. No character is sacred, and none will be spared if the dice decide their fate is at hand. According to lore, the tail of a manticore is barbed with cruel iron spikes. There will be much pain in the days ahead. Last time on Tale of the Manticore. Chapter 18 begins with Achillea interrogating a confused Fairwind about Odok Zygog, whose name she had previously mispronounced. He doesn't have much to tell her, except to say that the famous historian is a known recluse, and that there's more of rumor about him to be had than reliable information. Their conversation is interrupted when Cord finds something hidden under brambles and crabgrasses. It's a tile that can be easily lifted away to reveal an empty space below. Achillea is almost certain that Cord has just found the Kaymor crypt, and reasons that the ghost of Lyrhain must have been seeking it. Perhaps they can return his skull to its final resting place and lift Murak's curse. The 5 PCs descend into the crypt below using Doreni's rope, and Fairwind builds a small fire in order that he may see. Here, Achillea notices something about Cord's wound. Judging by the little sprout she finds on his torso, it appears that the wooden construct is not only healing, but growing. Cord levels up and gains the spell, Slow Poison. When we return to the group, we find them preparing to exit the room through the only available way out, other than the hole in the ceiling. They pass under an arch and come to a T-junction. Tentir begins to feel his courage leave him, but Doreni takes a moment to bolster his resolve and remind him of exactly who he is. In the previous episode, I talked a bit from a story, or meta, perspective about how I determined that there would be a way into the crypt via a removable ceiling tile with a broken corner. Tomb robbers had been here before at some point. That's how the skull of Prince Lyrhain found its way into Mombi's possession. The broken corner explains how the sprites had been able to enter the tomb. I neglected to mention that there was a third element to this. My event meaning, open success. I interpreted that to mean that the PCs could enter the Kaymor crypt without any real difficulty. So now I need to roll for a new set of prompts from Mythic. Here's 2d10, let's roll them up. I've got 59 and 24. That's agree, tension. Agree about tension? Or possibly tense agreement? Some dispute between 2 or more party members, perhaps. Well, as usual, I'm not too sure. But I'm not worried. It'll work its way into the story before long. While I have the action on hold, I'm going to flip another card for my one-shot-in-the-dark dungeon generator. I've got... It's the 10 of Hearts. That's actually my target card, as it represents the family crypt. In One Shot in the Dark, there's a rule that if you pull the target card too early, you have to replace it in the deck and reshuffle, then draw again. For this scenario, or if you prefer, module, I decided that I would need to pull a minimum of 3 cards before the PCs can reach their target room, and I've only pulled 1, so back into the deck it goes, and we draw a new one. Okay, the deck is reshuffled, and the new card is 3 of Hearts, which means the next room will be, let's see, a 30 by 40 foot room of statues with 2 exits. Pretty straightforward, and there's just one more thing to work out. I want a mechanic to introduce the possibility of danger into each new area of this crypt. I think that'd be more fun than populating it by DM fiat. Here's what I'll do. I'll make a wandering monster check every time I flip a new card to determine a new room. By the way, in Season 3, wandering encounters have happened when I roll high on a d6. That's how the expert rules say to do it. But I'm going back to the older basic D&D rule found on page B53 that says a 1 on a d6 indicates an encounter. So it's roll low in basic and roll high in expert, or more precisely, roll low in a dungeon or roll high in the wilderness. Clear as mud, right? Anyway, here's the roll for this room of statues. Using a d6, and I am looking for anything but a 1. I've got a 2. Ooh, too close for comfort. Yikes. But okay, I think I have all I need. Time to get back to the narrative. Chapter 19, Part 1. Day 16. Mid-afternoon. Mythic event meaning. Agree tension. Party status. Achillea, 7 out of 7 hit points. Cord, 8 out of 14. Dureni, 9 out of 9. Tentir, 10 out of 10. Spells available. Achillea has memorized Message ×2. Cord can cast Entangle, Locate plants and animals, and Slow poison.
Let's go left,
said Tentir, and so they did. Dureni led the way. Then came his younger brother, who was followed by Cord, Achillea, and Fairwind. Dureni's words had bolstered Tentir's confidence somewhat. Thinking of his mother had always had that effect on him. All the same, he could not deny the feeling of foreboding that seemed to suffuse his whole being. If only they were able to use their dark vision, it would not be so bad. But the humans' torchlight threw wild shadows everywhere, while barely lighting their way. The cleric's light came from behind and only extended a couple dozen feet ahead of them. Perhaps the human should be the one to take the lead, thought Tentir. He was more familiar with places such as these. Strange, underground places, built by men in an effort to deny death. The corridor ended in an archway that opened into a second room. As the companions grew near, the details beyond resolved into tall and frightening shapes. Again, if it hadn't been for the weird and inconsistent lighting, Tentir would have been spared the jolt of fear that shot through him when they first laid eyes upon the statues in the next room. He was simply not accustomed to seeing this way, nor with being in places like this, underground, with no easy exits at hand. So when he saw the first statue, it made him start. It was a life-sized figure of a bearded warrior, a little taller than Fairwind, but with a beard that was full and thick, with whorls and curls, unlike the cleric's, whose was thin and uneven. There was a similar statue beside the first, another warrior, also bearded, and with narrowed eyes that glowered under a lowered brow. In total, there were 6 statues. 3 were of males and 3 of females. The men were all warriors, judging by their stone weapons and armor. The women must have been nobles. They wore their hair in braids, and were decorated with jeweled necklaces, bracelets, and rings. Their faces were severe but beautiful. Every detail, from the jewels in their rings to their perfectly shaped faces, were all carved from stone. All statues had one thing in common. Each cradled a candle in their left hand, close to their breast. The sculptor had carved these with the same eye for realism as the rest of the figures, and had included small details such as runnels of melting wax, and topped them with little stone teardrop-shaped flames.
6 candles mark the way, through long life's twists and turns, from tiny infant's first breath,
said Achillea softly, remembering one of the first poems that her Vapi had taught her. Tentir and Dureni could not understand since she recited it in the common tongue, but they stopped and listened attentively, perhaps thinking that she was speaking a prayer.
Until the gray of age, and all that wisdom learns on the way to dusky death.
I know that poem,
said Fairwind in a low voice.
It's one of Hamnet Rattlestaff's best, though I believe the last line is on the way to dusty death. Wherever did you learn it?
I prefer dusky,
replied Achillea after a moment's consideration.
It's more evocative. Regardless, I think this is his very best, though I admit I always thought the 6 candles were a metaphor.
Rattlestaff knows the histories. He would have to have read...
Fairwind had no desire to reopen the subject of Odok Zygog.
Widely, in order to write as he does.
Apart from the statues and 2 more open archways, the room was empty. Nothing moved but for their shadows, which had diminished as the light from Fairwind's brand had begun to wane.
Which way, little mouse?
Asked Dureni to Tentir, once he determined that the conversation between Fairwind and Achillea did not concern him.
Left or right?
He pointed with the tip of his sword, first at one archway, then another. Tentir chewed his lip. The statues were lined up with 3 males to the left and 3 females to the right. To reach either exit would mean passing between 2 warrior statues, or else 2 of the noble women. Tentier could have no idea which way they should go, but he appreciated that his brother was giving him the choice, all the same.
Let's go left,
he said, and Durrani led the way. And just like that, it's time to generate the next part of this crypt. As I've only drawn 2 cards, if I get the 10 of hearts, my target card, then I'll need to redraw. Here goes. 6 of hearts. One shot in the dark tells me that's a... it's a trapped hallway. With no thief in the party, the PCs are bound to set it off. The table entry says it should do 1 to 8 points of damage, and I think that works. But hang on. We know that tomb robbers have been here in the past, so it's reasonable to say there's a chance they would have already set off this trap. I'll roll high-low. High means that's exactly what has happened. A 12. Well, that's good news for 2 reasons. There's the obvious, but it also means they are likely headed in the right way. I just need to make a quick wandering encounter check before I return to the narrative. Rolling 1d6. A 4. More good news. Only a 1 indicates a wandering encounter when in a dungeon. Durrani passed between the towering 2nd and 3rd warriors before entering a curving hallway that he believed bent to the west. Already he was losing his bearings down here. Why would humans opt to burrow in the earth like orcs when it was so much easier and so much more pleasant to build under the sky? He would have to ask Achillea to ask their new companion when they left this place. He hoped that would be soon. Behind him, Achillea was struggling. She found that the stone statues reminded her strongly of her Vapi, but she pushed the thought away. It would not do to be consumed by grief right now. So that's what she did. She pushed down her emotions and simply followed Durrani. 15 feet into the corridor, just as it started to curve to the right, something caught his eye, and he called a halt. He whispered back to Achillea to have Fairwind pass his torch forward, and the cleric reluctantly acquiesced. The flame was very small, Durrani noticed, and the torch looked like it wouldn't last more than another few minutes. He returned his attention to the shape that had made him stop. There was a line bisecting the top half of the corridor from the bottom, perhaps a pole or a spear, and it seemed to have pinned something to the left wall. It was a skeleton, a human skeleton. A few rags still clung to the bones, but that was all that remained of this poor soul. Durrani motioned the others to stay back while he crept forward, and he could hear them whispering among themselves as he did so. Yes, he'd been right. It was a skeleton, with some kind of shaft passing straight through it. It skewered the torso through the ribcage.
Poor creature.
Breathed Durrani to himself.
To die in a place like this.
To an elf, it was a harrowing thought, akin to being buried alive. Elves did not inter their dead. Durrani had heard stories about places such as these, and so he was familiar with the concept of traps. He understood what had happened here, but still could not see what had triggered the mechanism, though he scanned the wall and floor looking for clues. Eventually he decided that, since it was already tripped, the trap was now harmless. He called the others forward, and, one by one, they ducked under the metal shaft of the spear trap, maintaining their marching order as they proceeded to round the bend in the corridor. Once again, I've got the DM hat back on, and my dice and a deck of cards are at hand. Since I've already drawn 3 cards in the exploration of this dungeon, I've passed the minimum requirement before I could reach the target room. That's the 10 of hearts, which will indicate Murok's family crypt. My deck only contains heart cards, and I removed the 9, queen, and king even before it came into play. With the 2, 3, and 6 already drawn, there are now 6 cards left, still plenty of chaos. The sooner I draw that 10 of hearts, the better, because every card brings danger along with it, in the form of a wandering monster check or other potential hazards, just like we saw with the trapped corridor. Here's the draw. Jack of hearts. Oh boy, that's... well, I'll just read the entry. Ghost. If a character has died, their ghost floats through the wall. On a successful saving throw, the spirit blesses the party. If unsuccessful, the spirit blames the party for their death and curses them. There's a bit more in here, but it's not applicable to this story, and obviously there are no deceased PCs to bring back. Instead, I'll try to keep the essence of the encounter by saying that the party will encounter a ghost, but the saving throw, represented here by a high-low roll, will determine whose ghost it is. A high roll means it's the ghost of Prince Learhane, and he will likely provide some kind of help to the PCs. A low roll will indicate an encounter with the ghost of Queen Anaya, which would be very bad, or else the Count Wizard, whom we know nothing about and could go any which way. Since this is already a kind of wandering encounter, I will not roll the usual d6 as an additional check. I'm sure this will prove to be more than enough to fill out the scene. Rolling the high-low on a d20. Well, okay then. Chapter 19. Part 2. Day 16. Late afternoon. Mythic event meaning. Agree, tension. Party status. The party's status is unchanged. Dureni passed the waning torch to Tentir as he easily ducked under the spear trap, and then Tentir handed it to Achillea as he followed suit. Achillea, being a bit taller, had to dip down a half a foot before she passed and held the flaming stick for Cord, who was required to crawl awkwardly on his wooden hands and knees. Fairwind came last, also crawling, and received his torch back from the half-elf when he stood up. Looking at its dying fire, he had a notion, and thrust it into the skeleton's rags with a twisting motion. The flame sputtered and grew, brightening the hall as it flared back to its original size, while filling the corridor with the smell of burnt dust. Fairwind considered his work and tutted his tongue. His makeshift torch would last a few more minutes, but he really should have thought to bring more wood. The crypt was proving to be much larger than he'd expected. While the cleric worked on his light source, Achillea studied the skeleton impaled on the spear trap. Little winking embers speckled some of its bones and made it seem magical and otherworldly. Like Dureni, she considered how horrible it would be to die in a place such as this, and felt pity for them, whatever kind of person they had been.
This must have been one of the men or women who came and robbed this place,
she said to Cord, who creaked thoughtfully in agreement. The companions carried on down the hall. Fairwind's newly improvised torch flung their shadows against the walls ahead and made them stretch and loom like deformed phantoms as the passage began to descend by steps for another 15 or 20 feet deeper into the earth. When the steps ended and the passage flattened out, the party found themselves in a corridor that curved to the right once again, pointing back to the north. In the lead, Dureni was having difficulty seeing clearly because of Fairwind's torchlight, but before long he could make out an intersection ahead. Right in the middle of the junction was... Actually, Dureni did not know what he was seeing, and at first thought it was a trick of the light, just like their menacing shadows. In the space where the four hallways met, it looked to him as if the air itself was being bent and distorted. Thinking it might be another trap, he called a halt, intending to go on alone to investigate. But before he even turned around, there came a sudden coughing sound from Fairwind's torch. It flared brightly, despite the complete absence of any wind or air current down here. Then it sputtered again, and went out completely. Fairwind did not see what the others saw, and perhaps, for the sake of his sanity, that was for the best. As for Dureni, Tentir, Achillea, and Cord, when their dark vision resolved, they saw a thing that pushed the limits of reality as they understood it. In the intersection was a person that seemed to be made of fluid, milky glass. It floated a foot above the floor. No feet emerged from below the bell-like shape of the phantom's courtly robe, but it did have arms that extended from the sleeves of its glowing pale tunic. These ended in colorless hands that cupped a face that was not there. The floating apparition was headless, and yet it seemed to hold itself as though weeping. The torso shook with silent sobs, while the figure's whole being hung in midair, rotating slowly. Achillea's heart flipped in her chest like a beached fish. She knew right away that this was the boy from her dreams, but knowing did little to alleviate the terror she felt threatened to overtake her senses. At the same time, a river of pity broke through some dam inside her. Altogether, it was a concoction of emotions too strong and too strange to process. It was all she could do to remember to breathe.
The fire! I cannot see,
said Fairwind, in a breathy whisper that suggested he could sense something momentous was taking place.
Shh. Hold your peace, cleric,
Achillea admonished. Since Dureni, Tentir, and Cord could not speak with it, and Fairwind could not even see it, she knew it was up to her. Of course it was up to her. This was the boy from her dreams, and she had spoken with him before. The thought gave her the courage she needed.
Spirit,
She called, in what she hoped was a steady voice.
we are here to help you find your rest.
But there was no reaction at all from the floating apparition. Achillea had not expected that. She tried again.
Restless spirit, I am Achillea. I dreamed of you.
The words felt inadequate, foolish, but she didn't know what else to say. Durenian Tentir didn't understand any of it, as she was using the common tongue of men. All the same, Dureni whispered back,
It appears not to hear you, Achillea. What do you want to do?
Suddenly, Achillea had an idea. She cast the spell, Message.
Prince Lirhain, which way must we go in order to help you regain your rest?
The spirit's reaction was immediate, and the companions, as one, shrank back in fear. The translucent hands came away from where its face would have been, to reveal only a dark smudge. It was as if a painter, in frustration, had smeared his palm across his pigments while they were still wet. Although the aspect was terrifying, the voice that came to Achillea was pure and full of pain.
Are you there? I just want to sleep.
Show me the way.
Replied Achillea, this time out loud, since her spell had expired. At first, it seemed as though the ghost would not reply, but then, slowly and deliberately, it pointed a white finger down the westward hallway. An instant later, Fairwind's torch rasped back to life, brighter than it had been when he first lit it, making everyone start. Dureni blinked hard. The figure was gone. There was nothing in the space where it had been. No strange flexing of air. Nothing at all.
You saw something in the darkness, yes?
Said Fairwind in a quivering voice.
I know the way.
Was Achillea's reply. I briefly considered making a reaction roll to see if the ghost of Lirhain would be positively disposed towards the PCs or not. But in the end, I went with DM Fiat, deciding that the prince would recognize Achillea as his best chance for salvation. I had already exposed the party to danger when determining which ghost would appear, so it seemed unfair to force them to endure 2 rolls. Mechanically, knowing the right way to turn at this intersection in the dungeon will have an in-game advantage. I'm going to remove 3 cards from the 6 remaining in the deck. This gives the party a better chance to reach the target room faster, which is definitely in their best interest. Here we go, removing 3 cards. Okay, none of the newly removed cards are the target 10 of hearts. That card is still in there as one of the remaining 3. I'm not quite done with the cards though. I need to draw a new one to see what the PCs will find next. With luck, they are about to reach the end of this dungeon. And the draw? Well, look at that. It is the 10 of hearts. But there's still one more check to make as I roll for a wandering encounter. And this time, I think the stakes should be higher than a 1 in 6. Let's say a 1 to 3 on a d6 will trigger a dangerous encounter for this final room. Rolling. Looks like I didn't even need to raise the stakes. The dice gods know how this stuff is supposed to work. I've got a 1. Chapter 19. Part 3. Day 16. Late afternoon. Mythic event meaning. Agree, tension. Party status. The party status is unchanged, with the exception of Achillea, who has used one of her 2 message spells.
I know the way.
Was Achillea's reply.
Let's do what we came to do and get out of here.
Wait,
Said Fairwind.
I need a moment. Just give me a moment.
The cleric was staring into the tongues of fire that clung brightly to his makeshift torch. They cast moving shadows across his face and emphasized the conflicting emotions written across it.
Are you all right?
Fairwind glowered at the flickering flames for a moment before replying.
When I was young, my mentor would often tell me, Dalen, all the darkness in the world cannot extinguish the light from the smallest candle. He told me that I should think about that in time of doubt or despair.
He sighed.
But just now, I see that it is my faith that has wavered.
Something changed in his tone and countenance. His jaw muscles worked. Then Fairwind held up his brand as though it was his holy symbol.
Sidal has sent me a sign, and next time, I shall not falter. Lead the way, my friends, and let us put wrong to right.
Durrani could only guess at what the cleric was saying. He looked to Achillea, who nodded at him to proceed, so he did. He took them to the intersection where the ghost had hovered moments before, and although it sent a chill down their spines, they were not hindered in any way as they took the left turn, pointing west. A 40-foot-long corridor brought them to another open archway. They approached cautiously but deliberately until they could make out the contents of the chamber beyond.
Burial crypt.
Said Durrani, tightening his grip on the hilt of his sword.
Ready yourselves. I think this is it.
Thanks for listening to Tale of the Manticore. If you're enjoying the show and would like to help to support it, there are lots of ways to do so. You can recommend the show online or to friends. You can like and repost episode announcements on social media. You can pick up one of my offerings on DriveThruRPG or a t-shirt at www.beararts.store. And finally, you can rate or review the show on your podcatcher of choice. I am super grateful for all of your support. At this point, I'd like to share a listener review. This one was left by TWiz2 on Apple Podcasts. TWiz2 writes, "This is the only podcast I listen to religiously. I'm always excited when the next episode comes out. The narrator does an amazing job keeping neutral and not steering the PCs away from danger and keeping them from harm. And you can feel the genuine excitement in his voice as epic battles unfold. The episodes are the perfect length to listen to on a walk or on a commute to work." TWiz2, thank you so very much for that review. Words of encouragement like yours are a big part of what keeps me going. Very, very much appreciated. This episode features the voices of 3 great voice actors. Durrani, Tentir, and Fairwind are played by Kai Ellen, Kevin Berenger, and Dave Cooper, respectively. These guys are my core cast, and I am deeply indebted to them. Thank you guys. For those curious to learn a bit more about Tale of the Manticore, I keep a blog where I post all kinds of show and RPG-related stuff, like art, maps, tables, crafts, and show notes. You can find it at taleofthemanticore.blogspot.com. To keep in touch with me, I'm at Manticore Tale on X, Tale of the Manticore on Instagram, taleofthemanticore@gmail.com. I've also recently joined Blue Sky, so get in touch. I'd love to hear from you. The adventure will continue on the next episode of Tale of the Manticore, the story where chaos rules.